Okay. So before starting the session, so whatever programs we created so far, we have used procedural programming. So procedural programming uses functions or function modules. Okay. This procedural way of implementing the ABAP using functions. What is object-oriented ABAP? OOABAP or object-oriented ABAP uses classes.
Objects.
Classes, and inside the class we have objects, data. So we have data and objects. So when we use object-oriented ABAP. So which one is better? Procedural programming or object-oriented programming?
Object
So
one.
object-oriented way of writing the code is better than procedural programming because of the data security. Okay, here in procedural programming, we combine both data and objects into one single instance. But if we take object-oriented ABAP, they separate it. We can hide the data. We can hide the data for unnecessary objects. Only instance which is required or only object which is required, only those can access the data. Right? We can hide the data. We call it as encapsulation. In object-oriented ABAP, we call it as a encapsulation. We can hide the data to improve the data security. Okay. And again, we can use it for modularization. Just like function modules, we can modularize the code using methods, class methods. Here, if you take procedural programming, we use a function group, right? To group what we are going to group inside a function group.
All the related function
Related
modules
function
in one group.
modules. We are going to group all related function modules into one single function group. So all the function modules going to access the common data of that function group. Okay. Let's say there is a function group A with 50 function modules. Now you are calling function module ABC. One function module you are calling into the program. What happens here? The rest of the function modules are also loading into memory. Even though you are not using them, even though you are not executing them, all the rest of the function modules will also load it into the program memory. But they won't execute, but they load into the program memory whenever you call any single function module of a function group, right? So it will consume more memory and again it will reduce the performance of the program. But if you take object-oriented ABAP, here we are using class and method. So we are going to create a instance nothing but a memory for class before calling the method. So whatever the method you call, here the alternative for function modules. What is the alternative for function modules here in object-oriented ABAP? Methods. Okay. And what a class contains?
Objects.
Class contains objects and methods. It contains methods. So we group similar methods into one class. Okay. Right. To call a method, what is required?
Object.
Object is required. We need to create the instance. Instance is nothing but you can assume it as one memory to call the method. How many instances we can create for a function module? Again, we don't need to create any
Single,
object for function module because it's not object-oriented programming.
single
So here
instance.
there is only single instance, single memory for entire function module of that function group. There is no multiple instances, right? But if we take class and method, you can create separate instances. For example, you can create 4 different instances for the same class and for the same method. Whatever the data it handles or whatever the data it contains in each instance are different. Okay, you can differently handle each individual instance. Okay, by using object, by creating the separate instance. There is one more additional advantage of using object oriented ABAP. Reusability. Reusability is the additional advantage of using object oriented ABAP. So how to reuse? We have a concept called inheritance. We have a concept called inheritance. So what is the use of this inheritance? We can reuse the existing functionalities. We can extend the existing functionalities. We can reuse and we can extend the existing functionalities by using which concept?
Inheritance.
Inheritance concept. Let's say there is already one class with methods, class A, right? And you want a separate class, right? With the functionality which is already there in the class A and with some additional logic, with some additional functionalities. So instead of writing from the beginning in the class B, what you are going to do? You are going to inherit the class A, right? So whatever the methods or whatever the attributes available in class A will be added to class A will be added to class B automatically, right? You can reuse the functionality of the existing class methods using the concept of inheritance. Okay. So there is one more object-oriented ABAP concept, interfaces. What is the interface?
Methods without implementation.
Yeah, interface contains methods without any implementation, blank methods without any implementation. What does this interface methods contains? Only importing and exporting parameters. Okay, nothing else. Only importing and exporting parameters it contains. So what is the use of this interface?
We can achieve the same methods by using interfaces.
Yes, you can use same method for different functionalities. Method name is same. For example, get data. You can use the same method for different functionalities. In one scenario, you select specific records. In the other scenario, you select another set of records. Right? The same methods you are implementing for different functionalities. So we can achieve polymorphism. What is polymorphism? The same method is behaving differently in different scenarios. Method is same, but it behaves differently in different instances. Okay, that's what we call as polymorphism. Okay, so what are the concepts? Inheritance, to
Interface.
reuse. What is inheritance? To reuse the functionality which is already available, right? So we can reuse the existing class methods in this subclass. Here we called as superclass and subclass. Okay, superclass is something which is already there with the existing functionality, and subclass is something, the class which is inheriting the existing class, that we call as subclass, parent and child. Okay, we have different types of inheritance. We'll discuss in detail when we are working on inheritance. Okay, so polymorphism. What is polymorphism? We can
Using
implement
same
different
method.
functionalities with the same name, with the same method name. Okay, method name is same, importing exporting parameters are same, but we use it for different functionalities in different scenarios. Okay, so can we create implementation for interfaces?
Yes, sir. By adding interface to the class, we
Yeah, we
can
cannot
achieve.
directly create. Okay, so
Hmm.
don't directly say yes. Okay, when you are answering in the
Yeah.
interviews, so say that we cannot create the implementation for the interfaces. We can only implement the interface methods by adding it to a class.
Class.
Okay,
Okay.
so we have one more concept called encapsulation. What is encapsulation?
Hiding the
Yeah,
implementation
hiding
detail.
the implementation details to the external objects. Okay, so
Mm.
hiding the
Yes, sir.
implementation details to the external objects. It provides data security. Okay, so whatever the internal implementations, right? We hide it. We can hide it using encapsulation. Okay, by hiding implementation details. So what is abstraction? Abstraction means by using abstraction, we can hide the data. Here we are dealing with data. In encapsulation, we are dealing with implementation, right? Implementation logic. We hide the implementation logic. But in the abstraction, we hide the data. Whatever the data we are using in the instance, we can hide the data to the irrelevant objects. Okay. So we can show, for example, for one object, we need to share only header details. For the other object, we need to share only item level details. For the other object, we need to share only delivery related details. We should not provide access entire data. Okay, we should control that. We should control the data access for the external objects. How can you control it? By using data abstraction. Okay, by using data abstraction. By using encapsulation, you can hide implementation details to the external objects. Okay, and what is inheritance? Inheritance.
Child class
Uh,
will get the
We can reuse existing functionality of the superclass in its subclasses. We can reuse the functionality of the superclass in which class? We call whatever the class that is reusing the functionality of the existing class, right? We call that as subclass. Okay. Okay. These are few important concepts in object-oriented ABAP. Abstraction, hide the unnecessary data, right? Polymorphism, use the same method for different implementations, use the same method name for different implementations, and encapsulation, hide internal implementation details, and inheritance. What is inheritance?
achieve
Acquiring
the
the
property.
properties or reusing the properties, right? Acquiring the properties or reusing the properties of the superclass in its subclasses. The properties of the superclass we can reuse in its subclass with additional implementations. Apart from the superclass details, you can have your own implementations in the subclass. Okay. So let's see how to create a method, sorry, class. What is the transaction code?
SC24.
Yes. So we can also create local classes and global classes. There are two things here: global class and local class. Local class are local to the
Program.
program. We create it in the program level. Global class we create in
SC24.
SC24. So we can call these class methods in any application. Okay. So just like subroutines and function modules. Subroutines are local to the same program, right? Here also local classes you can use you can reuse only within the same program. So in these days, right, in every project, what we are doing, the common practice is, let's say someone asks you to create a report program. So what are the steps we follow? Someone or your functional consultant or someone will share you the what document? Which document they will share? For any development, what document they are going to share? We already discussed. What do we call that document?
FST.
Functional specification document or FSD, functional specification document. What do they provide in the functional specification document? Details about the development or the application, right? So what is the functionality they are expecting? What are the tables we need to use, right? So what is the special logic we need to apply? What are the different validations? What are the different conditions we need to follow? What is the expected output? And what is the selection screen? And what are the inputs they are expecting, right? Right? What are the tables we need to select? What is the relation between all the tables? And what is the expected output? So all these details they document in which document?
Functional specification
Functional
document.
specification document. So the functional consultant will prepare this. You can't find technical details here, but the overall requirement details about the functionality. What is the expected functionality and what are the validations, inputs and output they are expecting. Okay. And what is the next step? Once you got the functional specification document, what you need to prepare as a ABAP developer? Which document you need to prepare?
We need to prepare a technical specification document.
TSD or technical specification document. So as a ABAP developer, you need to prepare it. So you are going to provide technical details of the application. So what is the program you are going to create? What type of program it is? What is the title of the program? What is the transaction code you are going to provide? What is the selection screen parameters? And what are the names of the selection screen parameters? Whether they are mandatory or optional, right? What is the data type of the each parameter, right? And what are the tables you are selecting? What is the join conditions you are applying, right? And what is the logic you are implementing? And what is the report output you are displaying? You provide all the technical details. In which document?
Technical specification
Technical
document.
specification document. We call it as TSD, right? And once you complete the development, you update the technical specification documents if any details are missing. And then after the development, what is the next step? What is the next step after development? Unit testing, technical unit testing. We call it as TUT, technical unit testing. What do we do in technical unit testing? As a developer, you execute your program and try to test it, right? And you prepare a what kind of document? unit test document you are going to prepare. Okay. So let's create a program using object oriented class method. Let's take any of our report examples. First, let's check data, whether the data is available or not.
Sir,
Yes.
a- after after development, we'll prepare technical specification documents, sir.
See, first we prepare some draft document, okay,
Okay.
before going to start your development, right?
Hmm.
So
Okay.
in some projects, so they'll expect a in detailed technical specification document because they wanted to understand the design, what you are doing it, right?
Okay.
They need to approve it because they should not allow you to create the program in any way, right? Few guys uses function modules to modularize the codes. Few guys uses class methods to modularize the code, right? So they should
Yes.
not allow the developers to use procedural programming, right? Since
Yes.
everyone is recommending object-oriented way of doing it, right? So you need to
Yes.
mention all the details. What is the process? What is the design you are following? What are the concepts you are going to implement, right? Some cases, what will happen, right? We have a lot of obsolete objects. What do you mean
Yes.
by obsolete objects?
Outdated
Outdated objects.
objects.
So it is not recommended to use them in our programs because SAP might have delete anytime, right? So they mark
Hmm.
it as obsolete, but they did
Yes.
not delete as of now. SAP SAP is not recommended to SAP is recommended us not to use those obsolete objects. In some cases, we call them and use in our applications, right? So if you
Yes.
mention all of them in the technical specification document, someone will review it and
Okay.
they'll approve it if it is documented correctly, right? If you are not using any obsolete objects,
Yes, sir.
right?
Okay.
There is one more issue.
Hmm.
So when can we consider a function module that we can use?
After, I mean, it will complete. Function module will have to be checked.
Not checked,
Mm, here released, sir.
released.
Okay.
So the function module should be in the released state
Yes, yes.
before using it. Is it in the released state?
No, sir, not
No, it's
released.
not released. So it is not recommended to use, but you
Hmm.
need to mention these details. What is the function module you wanted to use, you are trying to use in your program, and everything you need to mention in the technical specification document. So someone will review and they'll check since it is not released, so can we use it or not? Okay, your lead or someone will advise on it.
Okay, sir.
So sometimes we complete everything. Once it is approved, then only we start the development. And
Yeah.
sometimes we prepare some draft document, right? Because without completing the development, we may not have clear idea on the function modules or objects what we are going to use, right? So we
Yes,
create a
sir.
draft document with basic details available. So once the development is completed, we update
Yes.
the document with the complete details of the application. Okay.
Okay, sir.
After that, you prepare the technical unit testing document, TUT.
Sir, here as a developer, we didn't have any sufficient unit testing data, sir. How we can?
With the basic data available because you are not doing the complete testing, right? So you need to
Okay.
make sure only you need to make sure that your program is working or not without any runtime errors or without any basic validation errors, right?
Okay, okay, sir. We can have any data. We can have any
They will
sample.
provide you need to ask the functional consultant for test
Okay,
data
okay,
to
sir.
test that application, okay?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Or you can find it in the tables. Go open the tables and find the test data, okay?
Okay.
let me create one application using object oriented ABAP. Before that, let me find proper data in the tables. Okay, we have only few records. Anyway, we'll create the object. So let's create our sales order report. Let's create our sales order report program using which methodology?
Class and methods.
Object oriented. Okay.
Object oriented.
So moving forward, let's try to use the package. Okay. Proper package and assign a transport request. Okay. Instead of saving in the local objects. Okay. So I'm creating a program. So you can check with your lead or someone in the project. What is the package I need to use? When you join in the project, right? You need to check with someone. Hey, what is the package we are using in this project? Okay. So in some cases, right? Module wise, we use a separate package name. For sales related objects, we use one package. For finance related objects, we use a separate package. You need to check with someone who are already there in the project about this package. Okay. So in which package we need to save these objects. Let me find any custom packages. Usually we use custom packages only in the projects, which starts with Z. So let's assume this is my package Z001. I'm assigning the package, save it. Don't save, don't save in any transport request. Whatever the transport request you see here, do not save. Please make sure it is created for your development or not. It is created by you or not. Or even though it is created by you, it is created for this specific sales order development or not. Don't save your object in any random transport request. Let's assume this is not relevant for our development. We need to create a new transport request. Create. What you need to provide here? Proper description. It tells about your transport request. Follow some standard naming convention. You can check with your project team about the transport request description. Otherwise, you can type anything. It will accept. It won't stop you to create. But it is always recommended to create a transport request with proper description. For example, it is related to SD and the task, whatever the task assigned is task 100 for the sales order report, and it is the first release, and about the description sales order report. Okay, provide proper description like this. Each project follows different naming standards. You need to check with your team about the transport request description format. Okay, otherwise it's a free text, you can type anything here. Save it, continue. So a transport request is created. Why? Because we assigned the package. Okay, here this is for comment. Here we type detailed functionality of the application. Okay, Like that you can type any details required. Okay. Also, we maintain the change log user. Okay. We maintain the change log here. What is the date that we changed the program, who changed it, and what is the requirement task ID. Okay. For example, if you are using Jira or ServiceNow, for every object there will be a task ID. You need to mention the task ID and transport request. Like that you are going to maintain all the change log whenever you do changes to the program. Particularly when you are working in support projects, this change log is very important. Okay. Now, what is the next step? Create the program. First, design the selection screen. Okay. Now, what is the selection screen you want? Usually they mention in the functional specification documents. What are the inputs they are expecting? Also, you can discuss with the functional consultants to do any changes to the selection screen. Since we are selecting sales order data, let's take a date, create a date and customer. Okay. Let's take create a date and customer as inputs. Okay. What is the data element for created date?
MMP.
BATS.
Sales order created date ERDAT. Okay. And we need one, yeah, that's it. Now, let's take date as select option. What is the syntax for select option?
For
For
LV underscore date.
LV underscore date. Okay.
Yes.
Let's take one parameter to allow only single value input. Customer ID, KUNAZ is the data element. Okay. So we have taken two parameters. One is select option and the other one is parameter. What is the difference between both?
Through parameter, we can pass single input, but
Yes.
through select option, we can pass multiple ranges, multiple
Right. Right.
inputs.
So by using parameters, we can pass only single value as input. By using select options, we can pass multiple single values and multiple ranges. And also we can include the values or exclude the values. And what is the other difference? For example, if you pass blank parameter to the where condition, what will happen? Is it going to select any data?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Because it will check for the exact value equal to. Parameter always check for the exact value equal to. If there is a blank in the table field, then it will select the data. Otherwise, the select statement will be failed. If you pass empty select option, what will
It
happen?
can by it can select all the data
It
by
selects
bypass the
all the
select.
data. Yeah, it ignores the where condition and select the all the data. Okay. Now our selection screen design is completed. Let's test the selection screen. Maintain the selection text. Okay. So as I said earlier, don't try to create the complete program at once. Okay. Always do it step by step. First, create the selection screen and test it. What is the next step? Initialization. If you want to pass any default values, what is the event you need to use? What is the event you need to use?
Initialization.
Initialization.
Initialization event. How to pass default values to the select options in initialization event?
By structure, select option structure.
Yeah, by using select option structure. For example, if you pass any default date or default value, what is the structure of the select
Low,
option? Okay,
low, high, sign option.
yes, low, high, sign and option.
Option.
Low equal to, for example, sy datum minus 100 days. It will automatically calculate that. High equal to sy datum minus 1 before date. Okay, to yesterday's date. Option. What is option?
We want in between or equal to one.
Equal to be used for multiple single values. Between,
Us.
we use it for
Ranges.
range of values. Sign. What is a sign? Include
Include,
or exclude. And then append.
append, so date.
Okay. Pretty printer to align the code. Now test your functionality. Whether it is populating default data or not. Yes, it is populating. Right. Now what is the next step? Validation. Okay. Let's validate it. What is the difference between edge selection screen and edge selection screen on?
At selection screen will validate all the input fields, but if we
Yes.
assign to a particular field, it will highlight the particular field message.
Yes. If you use edge selection screen, it will validate all together and it will enable all the input parameters, even though there is issue in the one single parameter. But if you use edge selection screen on, it will enable only that specific parameter if there is error in it. Okay. Now let's modularize this. Let's modularize this validation. For that, what we are going to create? A wrapper class. We call it as wrapper class or a global class for the program. Okay. Let's create a class. What is the transaction code? SC24.
Driver class.
So here you can create a class or interfaces. Both you can create. You can create a custom class or you can access a standard class. You can create a custom interface or you can access a standard interface. If it is a class, usually we follow this naming standard ZCL to identify it as a class. If you are creating a custom interface, ZIF underscore the rest of the data. Okay, ZCL. We call it as helper class for the program or wrapper class for the program. Okay, create the class, observe carefully, provide the description. Okay, now observe one option carefully. What is this? Final. What is this final checkbox? This final checkbox is used for inheritance. When you wanted to restrict the inheritance so that subclasses cannot access the objects and methods of this superclass, then use final. So you are restricting the inheritance. You cannot use inheritance on this class as long as the final checkbox is selected. If you remove the checkbox, then it is allowed for inheritance. If you select the checkbox, not allowed for inheritance. It is a final class. You cannot inherit it further. Okay, it's very important interview question. Okay, so this final checkbox decides the inheritance. Now save the class. Where you need to save it, select the package, relevant package, and click on save. And again, what it is asking for?
Request transport.
Transport request. Now in which transport request you need to save? We have created one transport request for the program. Now we are creating a class. Do we need to create a new transport request or going to save in the same transport request? Class is different, right? It's a different object. So do we need to create a separate transport request for this, or we can save this one in the same transport request which we created for the program?
Different
So
transport request.
that is not required. Okay, different transport request is not required. Save this objects also in the same transport request, because is it for a different development or different application?
No.
It is part of the same requirement, right? Same functionality. Task 100 functionality, sales order report only. This class also we created for the sales order report functionality only. So add these objects as well in the same transport request so that you can transport all together. Don't create separate transport requests. In few cases we create. Okay, so continue, save it in the same transport request. Now observe a few important things here. If you go to properties, if you go to properties, to assign the inheritance, there is an option called superclass. Okay, so what you are going to provide here, superclass for this class. If you want to reuse any functionalities, what is the superclass name you need to provide here? Click on superclass and provide the superclass name here. So whatever the methods and attributes available in the superclass will be automatically added to this current class. Okay, so currently we are not using the inheritance, so we are not using the inheritance. Okay, now observe interfaces here. If you want to implement any interface, you need to first add that interface here. Okay, first you need to add your interfaces here, then you can implement the interface methods. Observe attributes. What are the attributes? What are the attributes? So attributes are nothing but global objects to the class. Global objects to the class. So these attributes data can be shared by all the methods of the class. Okay, whatever the data available in attributes, right? All this data can be shared by methods of the class. All the methods of the class. Attributes are like your local data objects like work area, variable, and internal table. And we can also use constants. Okay, we can also use constants. Okay, so attributes, we can use these attributes to share the data between different methods of the same class. Attributes are nothing but global data objects like variable like object, work area like object, and internal table like object. You can store the data. You can store the data and you can access the data in the all the methods. Okay, how to define attribute? For example, ls underscore vbak. I'll explain what is instance and static later. Visibility. So we have three visibility levels: public, protected, and private. If you select public, the data will be accessible for all objects. If you select private, protected, only subclasses of this class can access it. If you select private, within the same class, outside classes cannot access the data of this attribute. Okay, for now I am selecting public. Associated type, what is the type? We need to use VBAK. Now what kind of object it's create? Variable like object, work area like object, or internal table like object?
Work area like object.
Work area like object, yes, because we are using the table name, or structure name also you can use it. If you want this attribute with the limited fields, you can use structure also, data dictionary structure also. To make it internal table like structure, what you need to do?
Need to create a table type.
Need to
That's
use a table type here. Okay, if you use data element, it acts as a
work
variable
area.
like object.
Sorry, very.
Okay, so attribute data can be shared within the all the methods of the class. Next, go to methods. Here we define the methods and implement the methods. Okay, how to define a method? For example, we need one functionality, right? What is that functionality? Validation, right? Customer validation. Validate customer. Okay, level. Instance means we need to create the object. To call the method, we need to create the object, and each object contains its own memory. Okay, that's what instance method. Static means it contains global memory. There is only single instance and it contains the global memory. We don't need to create any object for this. We call the method using a class reference. If you create instance method, each instance has its own memory. We need to create the instance. That means create the object to call the method. Instance method. And visibility, public, protected, or private. If we select public, outside classes can also access this method. If you select protected, only subclasses. So we have inheritance concept, right? Superclass will inherit to the subclass. Subclasses, only subclasses can access this method. Private means only within the same class we can use this method. Okay, protected means subclasses also can access this. For now I am selecting public. Validate customer, save it. What is required for this method?
To pass the input
We need to
parameters.
pass the input, right? We need to pass the input and return the output, right? If you
Yes,
talk
sir.
about modularization concepts, we need to pass some inputs and return the output. So how to define the import and export parameters? Place
Parameter.
cursor on the method and click on parameters. Here you can define. So what type of parameters we have? We have import, export, changing and returning parameters. Whoever familiar with the function modules, it is also similar. For example, I need an import parameter. Follow some naming convention. Otherwise, you can give any name, right? But it is always recommended to follow the naming convention as per the project. For example, importing parameter im underscore kunnr. Also, you can use customer like that. Okay. Type. What type of parameter it is? Click on here. Import, export, changing, and returning. So, what is the difference between import and export?
Through import parameter, we can pass the input. Through
Okay,
export, we can return the output.
right. What is changing?
It can act as both import and export parameter.
Yes. So, changing parameter will access both. You can pass some value, right?
Mm.
And
Yes,
you
sir.
can update the value and return that value as output. Okay.
Okay. Can pass.
So, returning parameter. What is returning parameter?
Will return the messages.
No, not messages. It will also return the data. Okay. It will also
Okay.
return the data. So, it will simply return the value. So, for example, you need to set the status true or false, right? After method execution, it needs to validate some condition and you need to set it is the output is true or false. So in that cases, you define a returning parameter. You define a returning parameter and use that returning parameter to set the true or false. It will just return true or false, right? With yes or no or some kind of value, it will directly return. You don't need to uh, validate anything on it. You can directly check whether the output is true or false. Okay. It will also return a value. It will also return the output. Okay.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Importing
Like
parameters. Yes, it is
Sabbath.
the input. Ah, correct. Yes. So it is a
Okay.
importing parameter. Importing parameter is for input, right? And what is the data element? You want any
Kunal.
default values? Mention the default value here. Same like function modules, defining these parameters. If you want to define it as a single value input, use data element. If you want to define it as a work area like input, use structure name or table name, right? If you want to define it as internal table like input,
Create a table type.
create a table type and use it here. So here we have one flexibility when we are using class methods, right? We have one flexibility. We don't need to create the table type. You can create table types within the class itself. You can create the table types within the class itself. You don't need to create
Yes.
externally. Okay. Now that is one input. What is the other input we have? What is the another input we have? Oh, yeah, for validation, this is the input. Let's see the other input later. Okay. For validation, this is the input. And what is the output? Exporting parameter. What you have to what you want to return? Type of the parameter is exporting. Okay. What you want to return? You can return anything, yes or no, or true or false, anything you can return. Okay. For example, Boolean. What is Boolean? True or false. Okay. True or false. ABAP ABAP underscore true, ABAP underscore false. It contains that value X or blank, right? You can also take this Boolean value, or you can also take some character 10 value. Okay, that's
Or
up to your
string,
requirement. String,
string or
string is a variable length, right? It's for huge data. Don't need it.
okay.
Let's simply take Boolean. Will return true or false. Now go to method, define the parameters. Now implement the method. How to implement a method?
By double click on the
Double
method.
click on it.
Yes.
Method and
Yeah.
end method. You can see parameters here. Import and export parameters here. If you want to hide these parameters, we have an option called signature somewhere here.
Hide or show
Hide
signature.
show signature. Okay. So what is a Boolean type? You can use it for a function modules also. X means true. Blank means, yeah,
False.
hyphen, sorry, not blank. Hyphen means false. Space means unknown. Okay. ABAP underscore true, ABAP underscore false. You can use to check it. Okay.
Okay.
Now let's implement the functionality. Select single Kunar from which table? What's the master table for customer?
KNA1.
KNA1.
Into, okay, if sy hyphen sub rc equal to 0. What does that mean?
Statement successful.
Successful. The customer is valid. Then what we need to pass to the exporting parameter?
ABAP.
ABAP underscore true.
True.
Else ABAP
False.
underscore false.
Okay.
Activate the method. So make sure you are activating the complete class. So class is not selected here, right? Select the class as well. Okay. All the objects created for the class. Make sure select everything and activate it. Go back. We have created a method, one method. Like that, you can add more methods. Depends on your requirement with different parameters. We have added one attribute. We have added one method. Anyway, we are not using this attribute. So you can set the value for this attribute within the method. Okay. You can set the value or you can read the value within the attribute. So to exchange the data from different method, how can you exchange?
True attributes.
Through attributes. Okay. Populate the data to attribute and you can use this attribute in the all the methods. So these attributes acts as global objects for the all the methods of the class. Okay.
Okay.
Now our method is completed. Now how to call this method? What type of method it is?
Instance method.
Instance method. So it needs a instance, it needs a memory, right? Then only we can call this method. If it is a static method, it contains only one single instance, global memory. No different instances possible. So we call that class using class name. We call that method using class name reference. How many of you know we have used one static method? Can you tell me what is the static method we have used?
CL demo output
CL demo
display method.
output. So CL demo output and display. CL demo output is the class name and display is the method name. So that is a static method. That's why we are using class name and that arrow and method name to call the method. But it is an instance method. To create the instance, to call the instance method, what is required?
Object
Object
is
is
required.
required. Now, to call the method for the validation, first create the object. Without the object, we cannot call the method. How to create the object? There are two ways. Old way of doing it is data object name lo underscore obj type ref to type reference to which one? Class name.
Yes,
You
name.
don't need to create separate object for each method. For example, there are 5 methods here and you are using all 5 methods in the program. You don't need to create separate object for each method. You create object for the class. You create instance for the class, not for the single method. Okay. So you can use the same object to call the different methods of the class. Okay. Now we just defined the object. We did not create the instance yet. How to create the instance? Create object and whatever the object you defined, object name. Clear? And then call the method. Make sure object is created. How to make sure that? If is not initial. Okay. We can make sure the object is created. Now how to call the method? Simple. Go to pattern, ABAP object patterns, select this option and what is the instance name? Call method, select the call method. What is the instance name? Instance name
L1.
nothing but object what you have created. What is the class name?
Just here.
This one, right?
Yes.
What is the method name? You can select here. Since there is only one method, it is directly selecting. Continue. You're calling the method here. Pass the import parameter. How to return the output?
Defining the separate.
We need to use some variable, right? To return the output. Variable or work area or internal table like structure. Depends on the exporting parameter type. We
Yes,
need
sir.
to define one, right?
Yes, sir.
So since we are using object-oriented ABAP class methods, you don't need to define it externally. You can use inline declarations. You can use inline declarations here. But if we are using function modules, we need to define it separately and need to pass that here. Define one variable using inline declaration. Okay. How to validate it? If lv underscore status equal to ABAP false, then what we need to do?
Raise a message.
False means it's an invalid record.
Yes.
Message.
Valid customer. E.
Okay. Type. Here,
Yes, sir.
if you try to call a method without creating the instance, what will happen? Can we call a method without creating the object?
No, sir.
No,
See,
we should not call it. But is it going to stop you when you try to call the method without creating the object? Is it going to stop you? No, it won't stop you. You can still call the method. But what will happen? will give runtime error. Okay, it will give runtime error if you call a method without creating the object. Let's assume, so we defined the object, we defined the instance. Did we create the instance? Did we create the
No,
instance? No, I commented it. Is there any syntax error?
no, sir.
No, right? So let's try to execute this. I am disabling this validation, initial check validation. No errors. Execute. I'll enter some customer ID. What happened? Didn't throw any error in the program, but when I execute the program, it is giving a runtime error. So what is it saying? Zero object reference, zero object reference. So go to the error analysis. You are trying to access a component with zero object reference. An object reference must be point to an object. That means it is not created. Instance is not created, right? Change it. So create the object before calling it. Okay?
Sir, since
Yes,
it is a instance method, we have to create an object. If
correct.
it is static method, it will.
No, you call the method using class name like this. You don't create the object. You just call the method by using class name like this.
Then we don't have any runtime exceptions.
Yes, usually we don't have any runtime errors when we use static methods because you use
By
class
class.
reference, right?
Yes,
No.
sir.
Okay. Until unless you pass importing and exporting parameters properly, you won't get any runtime errors. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So this is how we call the class method. Always check for whether the object is created or not. There is one more object is bound. You can also use this instead of not initial, initial, not initial check. Object is bound. Bound means assigned. Okay, whether it is assigned or not. Instance is created or not. You can also use this. Okay. So we are creating the object using old ABAP syntax. First we define the object and then we are creating the object and then we are calling the method. So in a single statement we can create the object by using inline declaration. So how to create an object in single line? Data of lo underscore obj
New.
equal to, okay, that's it. So we can also create the object like this using a new ABAP syntax. Okay. Is everyone clear? Why we use brackets? There is a special purpose here. We have a concept called constructor. We have a concept called constructor method. So I'll explain that constructor method in the next session. Does anyone of you know what is constructor? It is common to any object-oriented programming. What is a constructor? Constructor is a special method, okay? Constructor is a special kind of method. So when this constructor method will execute? When we create the instance, it will automatically execute. You don't need to call it separately. You don't need to call the constructor method separately. It will automatically execute whenever you create the instance for the class. It will automatically execute. It contains only inputs or importing parameters. It won't return any output. Okay, it won't return any output. So when the constructor method will execute,
When object is created.
whenever an object is created, it will automatically execute, right? And it contains only importing
Input.
parameter, no exporting parameters possible. And can we use any name for the constructor method?
No, sir.
Name of the constructor method should be always
Constructor.
constructor. Okay, if you observe this, it is automatically adding that symbol, constructor symbol. This is a constructor method. You cannot call this constructor method separately. It will automatically execute whenever you create a object. Why we use this constructor method? To execute any default functionality, to populate any global values, we use this constructor method. Observe the parameters. Here we have any choice to select the parameters. Why? Because it allows only import parameters. It allows only import parameters. For example, im underscore data, some value. I'll just show you how it works. Is it a optional parameter or mandatory parameter? If you don't select this optional parameter, it's a mandatory one. Okay. Now go to method, double click on the constructor method to implement it. So what type of parameter it created? Importing parameter.
Input.
No exporting parameters are possible. So you can write any code here to populate any default values or any functionality, whatever you want to execute by default whenever you create the object. Okay. So when this constructor method will execute, let me keep
No.
a breakpoint here. Let me keep a breakpoint in constructor method. I'll keep this object creation before calling the method. Let's check how this constructor method will execute.
Hmm.
IM data, what is IM data? Oh, sorry. We have defined an importing parameter, right? So that's why it is expecting since we make it as a mandatory parameter, it is also expecting importing parameter. Mm. So let's pass this customer only. Okay, let's pass this customer as a importing parameter. I don't think it won't pass any type conflict error because what this is character 10, right? I think Gunnar also character 10.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Just as an example, just pass this. Keep a breakpoint here at the object creation, F8. Now where are we? In which step? Object creation step we are at. Controller is at F5 or F6. So which one is triggered?
Constructor.
Constructor method is triggered automatically. Whatever the functionality inside, it will automatically execute. Okay.
Okay.
Object is created and the object is bound, and we are going to call the customer validation method. Okay.
Hmm.
The name of the method should be constructor. Okay. So the rest of the functionality to select the data, to select the sales order data, right? We can also pass select options as input for the class methods. We'll see that in the next session.